So this session is now being recorded, and we'll make the recording available to you and everybody that has signed up for this particular training. We'll also make the slides that we're using available to you as well. Okay. So before we really kick off, I'd like for the members of the Validation Hub to introduce themselves. So Naza, can you get us started, please? A brief introduction.
Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Naza. I'm going to be one of your presenters today. I'm a senior at the George Washington University, and yeah, I'm really excited to do this presentation for you all.
Flora, you help us next, please.
Yes, hello. I'm the other presenter today. My name is Flora. I study at the George Washington University as well. I study geography, and I'm excited to be presenting for you guys today.
Excellent. Thank you. Ken.
Hello, my name is Ken. I'm a senior at George Washington University. I'll be answering questions and meeting people today.
Thank you, Ken. And Sam.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm also a senior at George Washington University. I will also be answering questions.
Awesome. Great. So during the presentation, I ask that everybody keep their microphones muted except for the person presenting. And if you have a question while we are going through, then please put it into the chat. Myself, Sam, and Ken will be monitoring the chat regularly to sort of hopefully give live feedback. But during the presentation itself, both Naza and Flora will pause at different times to see if there are any questions to take on at that time. We'll address those at that moment and then move on with the rest of the presentation. If you should happen to lose your connection or get kicked off of this particular feed, don't worry. Ken is monitoring the waiting room, so when he sees you back in there, he'll let you back right in. Okay, so I'm going to keep recording and keep on trucking through. And so with that, I'm going to mute myself and hand it over to Naza and Flora for the presentation. Thanks very much.
Awesome. So I'll share my screen and I will show you guys our presentation. So this is the intro to JOSM training presentation, and it will be conducted by myself and Flora. This entire presentation will be recorded, as Richard said, and sent to you after this. If you have any questions, feel free to shout it out or send it in the chat.
Perfect. So we're going to start with just an introduction into what JOSM is. JOSM stands for Java OpenStreetMap Editor. So it's a desktop editing application that is used for OSM. It's written in Java, which we'll get to later. That affects what downloads you have to do before you start using JOSM. But it runs on all operating systems. And what's nice about JOSM is that you can use the data that you download from the server. You download it onto your computer, and then you can edit it locally before you push it back onto the server. So that's really nice. It makes the work a lot faster. And what's lovely about JOSM is that it has a lot of plugins and a lot of features that you don't have in the IDE editor, which make the editing a lot more efficient. Next slide, please. So this is the interface of JOSM. As you can see, it looks a lot more intimidating than what we're used to in the IDE editor. But what's nice is, like I said earlier, you have all these tools and functions, which we will explain to you now. And once you understand how they work, it actually becomes a lot easier to use than the IDE editor. So you just have to hang in there. Right, so these are the two. On the left, you'll see the IDE editor, so that's what we're used to. And on the right, we see how editing looks like in JOSM. And as you can see, it's a lot faster, just because this, for example, is the plugin called Buildings, and it allows you to make buildings a lot quicker. Instead of having to map each node individually, you get to do a building as a whole. Next slide. So this is what's nice about JOSM, is that it's an open source platform. And the good thing about that is that there's so many forums and there's so much support online. It's all free and it's easy to access. And it just shows how much has been experimented with. And this allows you, as you're going through this process of learning how to use JOSM, you can always refer back to these links, to these forums. These will be available in the slideshow that will be shared afterwards, like Richard and Naza already said. All right, next slide. So the first thing we're going to do is to walk you through the installation process of JOSM. Next slide. Thank you. So as we already said, JOSM is a Java-based editor. So what you need is Java in order to have JOSM. This is the first step. You can download it at at the link that's on the slide, sorry. You'll need Java 8 or higher. So you might need to update your Java or download it entirely, but that's the first step. Next slide. And then the second step is to obviously install JOSM. All the links are in the presentation again, which will be shared after. It's important to get the newest version and to update it frequently just because there are pretty regular updates to fix bugs and add new features. So it's always nice to keep it up to date. Next slide, thank you. And now that you have JOSM and Java downloaded, you can, we're going to walk you through the JOSM interface and how to get everything set up for your use. Next slide. So this is what first opens up when you open JOSM for the first time. It will usually talk about updates or new features, and it will inform you if there's a JOSM fundraiser or anything like that. But this is what it will look like. But now we're going to go on to the setup of JOSM. Next slide. So the first step to kind of set up your JOSM account is that you have to authorize or link your JOSM to your OSM account. Because as I said earlier, you edit the data locally and then it has to be pushed back onto the server. But for that to happen, you have to have linked it to your OSM account. So the way you do that is you go to Edit and then Preferences. You select the connections settings and then you click Authorize Now. This will allow you to enter your OSM username and password, and then you click Authorize Now. You can see it being done on the right-hand animation there. It might look different if you're on a Mac. The icons will look a bit different, but the general, gist of it is the same. And you'll want to keep the preferences window open because we're going to do more steps in setting up your JOSM. Next slide. So the second step, which is very related to the first step, is setting up remote control. Again, remote control, it serves as a link between the OSM server and the local JOSM that's on your computer. So you'll want to stay within the preferences window. If you've exited already, it's Edit and then Preferences. You'll want to click the remote control settings and then check Enable Remote Control. Again, you can see it on the animation on the right. You click OK, and you'll want to keep the preferences window open again one more time for one last step in setting up your JOSM. Next slide. And this is one of the most important steps in setting up your JOSM. And it's one of JOSM's best features. As we said earlier, you can download plugins. There's many different ones. We won't go through them all, but there's a lot of forums online which will explain to you what each plugin does. The main ones we use, there's 3 of them. It's the Buildings one, the Utilities plugin, and the Mapathoner. And the way you download them is that you go within the Preferences window, you go to the plugin icon. It will be this little puzzle piece, the blue puzzle piece. Once you've clicked on that, you'll search for the different plugins that you want. Make sure to select all 3 of them. And once you've selected all of them, all the ones that you want to download, you'll select Download List, and this will install the plugins. Right, next slide. So this is what the interface looks like of JOSM. So like we said, it's a bit intimidating, but you get used to it quite quickly. There's different parts of it. I'm just going to explain how to navigate all of this. In the main square, you have the map view. This is the main window where your data will be displayed and where the editing takes place. If you remember in the ID editor, that's the areas that are in the pink square. At the top, you have the main menu. It's customizable depending on which plugins you have installed. Under that, you have the shortcut toolbar. This you can also customize depending on what you're using at the time. On the right, you have the information panels, which are really important, especially when it comes to looking at imagery, when it comes to looking at layers, and when it comes to looking at object tags, which we'll get to later. And on your left, you have the editing tools. These are all the tools that you'll be using while you're editing. So things like drawing nodes, lines, buildings, etc. But this just gives you an overview of what it will look like. Next slide. Right. So I will now pass it on to Naza, who will give a brief demo of what was just presented on.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Flora. So I'm going to go over to my JOSM, and this is what we saw in the presentation. This is the first screen that you're going to see when you boot up JOSM on your computer. So I'm going to go into the preferences window. Since I'm on a Mac, it's going to be underneath this JOSM. But for the rest of you on Windows, it's going to be under that edit panel. All right, one second as I try to find it. That's not right. So under JOSM, it's going to be under settings instead. Seems they've changed that recently. But for the rest of you on Windows, it's going to be under edit, and you're going to see that preferences window. So here I have that window up. And first I'm going to go into my connections panel, which is going to look like these two little blue icons. And I'm already logged into my account, so it looks a little bit different. But what you're going to do is you're going to click authorize now. There should be a button that says authorize now. It would be right here where I have my basic authentication. And then you're going to enter your OSM username and details. Click authorize now once again, and then accept your access token. As you can see, I have mine already. I already accepted my access token, and I don't want to remove it. Next, I'm going to go into the remote control, which again is going to be on that left side panel. I'm going to scroll down. Until I find a little, it's going to look like a little remote control icon. It's right here. And you can see it's that remote control feature. So I'm going to press enable remote control right here. I have mine enabled already. This makes sure that you can bring data from OSM and upload it to your JOSM, so it connects them together. And that's really important when working on any sort of YouthMappers project. Next, I'm going to go into the plugins window, which is going to be this blue puzzle piece right here. And I'm going to add all of those plugins that Flora mentioned, which is the buildings tool, the Mapathoner tool, and the utilities plugin. So I'm going to click on the search bar and I'm going to search for it. First, the buildings tool, which is buildings _tools. And you can see I already have mine clicked. So if I were you, I would click that. Then I'm going to look for my utils plugin 2, utils plugin 2. Click that as well. And finally, the Mapathoner tool. Mapathoner. These are three really important tools that we suggest that you download. So now that they're all selected for you guys, you're going to press download list. I already have mine downloaded, so I'm not going to press it. And then you're going to press OK. Now it's going to get rid of that preferences window. And now I'm going to hand it back to Flora to explain the next part of it.
Thank you, Naza. So now that we understand how to download JOSM and how to set it up, the next step will be how to actually receive the data that you'll want to be working on. Next slide. So there's different ways to receive the data onto your JOSM app. The main one is that you'll want to click on File and then Download from OSM, or you can simply click on the download button, which is the little downward arrow. In the download window that pops up, you'll select the Slippy Map tab. And then what's nice is you can just use your mouse and pan and locate the area that you want to work on. This could be anything, either it's a project you're working on or you want to map your hometown or your neighborhood. Then you will draw a box around the area that you want to download, and then you simply hit download at the bottom of the window. This will then allow you to receive the data from the OSM, from the OpenStreetMap, and open it in your JOSM map window for editing. So this is how you can edit it offline and then push it back. Next slide. There's, like I said, other ways to specify the area that you want to download. You can also log on to the OSM website, and you would just search and then zoom into the area of interest, so the area that you want to map. And then you copy the URL. It's very simple. You just copy the URL at the top once you've found the area that you want to map. Next slide. And then you can download the data by pasting the URL from the OSM website onto JOSM. So you will click on File, Open Location, or simply Control L, and then it will allow you to enter the URL. You will paste that into the window, and then you just hit Download URL, again on the little button with the downward arrow. Next slide. Once you've downloaded this, you'll see how it pops up in the main map view. As I mentioned earlier, the pink square that you're used to in the ID editor is now the hashed gray area. The imagery may load automatically. If not, sometimes you have to look in the imagery layers. You have to open the imagery menu item and then make sure to check the, sorry, you have to, I'll try again. The imagery that you want to use depends on the project instructions. Usually you'll find them on the tasking manager. Sometimes it will load automatically. Sometimes you'll have to add it manually, and you can see how that's done in the animation over here. There's an imagery tab on the main menu, and it allows you to add, the main ones such as Bing, Esri, and this is then how you can compare your data and continue the mapping. Next slide, please. It's important to understand the concept of layers in JOSM because these are very helpful in editing your data. You can activate and deactivate the visibility of any layer. You can also change the order of alignment. You can increase or decrease the opacity of it. So it's really a helpful tool to use. It often gets overlooked, but it's very nice to use, and we'll just explain to you some of its features in the next slide. Next slide, please. Perfect. So like I said, it can be helpful to adjust the visibility of your imagery. Sometimes you'll want to change the opacity of it, right? If you want it to be more or less transparent. What I also like to do is to change the gamma. So you increase the gamma, and this allows certain features in your landscape to pop out. So this can be very helpful if you're working, for example, on data where there's a lot of shade and a lot of shadows. Then it can be helpful to use the gamma, to increase the gamma, because it makes it easier to see which parts are building and which parts are shade. And it's also, just as always, when mapping, it's a good practice to compare different imagery sources to make sure that you're using the best data at hand. And I'll pass it back on to Naza now, who will demonstrate.
Thank you, Flora. All right. Here again is my JOSM. And now the first thing I'm going to do is download some data. You can use this green arrow here, like Flora said, or you can go into File and Download Data right here. I'm going to click that, and it'll bring up this Slippy map. And I have this area selected here, or you can click any sort of area. This would be by left clicking and dragging, and you can see I can make my box as big or as little as I want. We're still gonna go with this area right here. And then what you wanna do is you're gonna press download down here. And once I download my map, it will appear. And you can see I have all of that data. Some things to note is this hashed area. This is where that pink box would be in the ID editor. You can see now there's this hashed area where you don't want to map because that's not the part that we selected. But the part that we did select, there is no hashing. And this is the area where you want to put all of your edits in. If I want to add some sort of imagery, I would go up to my top panel. Oh, Zoom came in the way a little bit. I'm going to go up to my top panel to where that imagery button is, and I'm going to click on it. And you can see I have all of these different types of imagery. But there's Bing, Esri, Mapbox. For now, I'm going to show you Bing imagery. And then you can see on my right over here, I have a layer that's just my data, and I have a layer that's my Bing imagery. And you can see we've selected a little bit of a forest and a little bit of a residential area. Now, if you want to download, I'm going to first turn off this Bing aerial imagery, and I'm going to show you how to download data directly from OSM. So this is OSM. Here I have pulled up just a little area on our Foggy Bottom campus in Washington, DC. We have the circle here, and I can move around and look at all of the different areas. I can zoom out and zoom back in. Now, let's say I want to take this area that I'm looking at right now. What I would do is I would copy this URL. So I'm just using Command copy. I'm going to go back to JOSM. I'm going to go to File and then scroll down to where it says Open Location up here, or I can press Command L. And you can see over here on the right, there's this download location. So it says enter your URL. So I'm going to paste my URL that I just got from OSM, and I want to press download URL. And it's going to take me directly to that data that I downloaded. Oh. Zoomed out a little bit. As you can see, here's that circle that I was talking about. And I'm going to turn back on that. I'm going to actually download a different layer of imagery for this. Let's say we want to go to Esri. So I would go up to that top, press imagery, scroll down to Esri, click it. And as you can see behind some of these edits, you can see we have some imagery here. All right. And then I'm going to pass it back to Flora to do the next set of the presentation.
Thank you, Naza. So as we can see, we will now move on to the basic operations. So that's how to edit and how to create different objects in JOSM. So this is the actual editing. Next slide, please. So the process in JOSM is pretty similar to the process in the ID editor. We draw to add new shapes and lines and points, and then we add information that describes what we're drawing. Either that's information that we have from our local knowledge, or that's just information that can be seen. It's important not to map outside your area, sorry. So as Naza explained, that's the hashed area, and you can see that in the picture down below. Next slide. So the basic operations are, it's quite intuitive, and if you have a mouse for your computer, it's quite helpful. But to drag the map around, you use your right mouse button. To manipulate an element, you'll want to left click, and then the scroll wheel can be used to zoom either in or out. If you're using a map, it can be a bit different, and it depends on the settings that you have set up on your trackpad. But like I said earlier, it can be quite helpful to use a mouse when you're manipulating in JOSM. Next slide. So these are the basic operations. Just to remind you that Naza will demonstrate this later, but it's good to get an idea of what's happening without the visuals at first. So the main tool is the select tool. This is to select elements to view or edit their tags, and this is kind of the basic one that you'll be using. You can either hit S on your keyboard, or you can click the select tool on the left of your menu. If you want to add new elements like nodes, or you want to add multiple nodes to create a line, you can hit the A button on your keyboard or just select add. And the last tool, which isn't very popular because you shouldn't use it too much, it's the delete tool. Sometimes you have to use it, but you can definitely learn tools that fix what you have or what others have mapped. And that way you can preserve the history of the item, which is a good practice to have in JOSM. Next slide, please. So in OSM, the terminology is a little bit different, but it's mainly the same as in GIS, right? You have nodes, ways, and closed ways or areas, polygons. So the nodes are it's a point with a set of coordinates of longitude and of latitude. They exist in space. Ways are like line segments. It's two or more nodes that are connected. And then the third one, it's a closed way or an area, also known as a polygon. These are closed ways. So this is ways that continue and then close up as a loop. They're used to describe areas like parks or islands or buildings often. And I should have said this earlier, but the ways are used to describe usually roads and paths, but that's pretty self-explanatory. Next slide. So the first step is, how do you draw a node? It's quite easy. You have to make sure that your selection is clear. Otherwise, JOSM might want to connect the node that you're drawing to a previously selected node or area or path. So you just have to make sure that your selection is clear, but that's the default usually. Otherwise, you can press selection and then unselect all, or you just press the escape button on your computer. Then you press A, or you select the draw nodes to begin drawing a node. You can either double click on the spot where you want to have the node, or you can use your left mouse button and then press escape. These are two different options of doing it. And then you return to the select mode if you want to add tags or other descriptions, but we'll get to that later. Next slide. So that was how to draw a node. Now, how do you draw a way? That's the next step. If you already have a node, it will automatically have a line in the direction that you're slicing the connecting points. I hope that makes sense. I usually double click when I'm done with, oh, sorry, one back. Thank you. You just want to, if you already have a node connected, you just want to keep pressing in the area, in the direction that you're already mapping it. To stop, you can either go back to select mode or press S. You can press the escape button, or you can also double click. I usually double click because I'm already clicking and it's intuitive, but there's obviously so many different ways of doing it. Next slide. Right, so this is specifically to drawing roads, so not just lines in general, but roads. What's important here is that it will ask you to add a tag. So if you know the area, if you have local knowledge, it's important to add attributes to what you're mapping. We'll get more into what keys and what values are, but when you're mapping a road, it's important that you'll want to add the key equals highway. And then the value will either be residential road or unclassified. This depends, and sometimes you may not know if you don't have local knowledge. But the way you do that is, once you finish tracing the road, as we explained earlier, you add a tag to the road by hitting Alt-A. And then, as I said, you enter key equals highway. If you're unsure about whether it's residential or unclassified, you can always check the project instructions, or you can check on a road tagging wiki page. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of online resources for that, and it's always helpful to check back, see what they're saying. Next slide. So the third form of mapping is a polygon. So this is an area, right? It's very similar to drawing a way, except that, as I said earlier, you finish drawing the way by ending up on the same point where you started. You can see it here in the demonstration, in the animation. And as you know, Naza will demonstrate it again later. But you start by just drawing or tracing the area. And then, like I said, you close at the beginning node. Residential areas are mapped like this, that you'll want to do key equals land use. And then the value is residential. But you don't have to understand the tags right away, because the next slide will be much more helpful in understanding that. Next slide, please. Right, so there's a difference. There's the tags that we use in OSM are just attributes. They describe what you see, and they always have to be attached to the elements, so to the nodes, to the ways, or to the areas. And a tag always pairs a key and a value. Now, the key is a more general classification of the feature. This will be something like highway or land use. And then a value is more specific and exists within that key. So this can be like residential highway or residential land use. That's the main thing you should remember, is that the key is general and then the value specifies the description within that key. Next slide. So how do you add a tag? It's quite simple. You use the add button. Then once you click on the add button, the add values window will appear, and there you can select a key or a value from the drop-down list. What's nice is that the drop-down list, it will contain all the values in the downloaded area. So it gives you a pretty good idea of how you should be tagging the objects that you're mapping. Next slide, please. It's also, what's nice is that there are a lot of pre-existing tags that can be used by going to the presets menu. To add a preset, you just select an object that you drew, and then you go to presets that's on the top, and it will give you this whole list of preset tags, which are helpful because they'll already have a pairing of keys and values that you can just add in. And now we'll go on to Naza for another demonstration. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Flora. Now I'm going to go into my JOSM. And I'm going to turn off my imagery for now. And we're going to go. I'm going to turn off my data layer as well. All right. Now we have this area. Again, to review some basic navigation, keep my data layer on for now, or I'll keep my this layer on. If I want to move to the left or right, I'm going to press my left click and my right click. I lied, my right click, and I'm going to move around, and you can see my map is moving with me. If I want to zoom out, I can use my scroll wheel to zoom out and zoom back in. And then if I want to select something, I can use my left click, which I will show you later, or I can go up to this left-hand side and you can see I have my select tool right here. We've also got a load of other tools here. This little line right here is going to be your add tool, or your add nodes or draw nodes. There's also this building tool here where you can draw buildings. First, I'm going to show you by mapping out this road on how to draw a road. So first, I'm going to take my left click and I'm going to click once. You can see there's one node and I have this line following me. And every so often when I want to draw a road, I'm going to click. Gotta have my data layer on. All right. I'm gonna do it on a little bit of a smaller scale. So that's why I wanna draw this. I'm gonna click once and you can see there's a node created right there. And then I'm gonna move, I'm gonna click once again and click once again. And then I can either press escape or double click. I personally press escape, it's up to you. And then I'm gonna go up to the left to my select tool. And I'm going to select it and I want to make sure that I tag this correctly as a road. So I'm going to go to the right here to where I have tags and memberships. And I'm going to press add. And you can see this add tag comes up. And let's say I want to tag it as highway is unclassified. So the key is going to be highway. And then we want to choose a value. And we can do unclassified. I can click this bar here and scroll down and we have all these different types of classifications. Here's that other highway equals residential if we would like. And once we have picked a tag that we like, you can press OK. And now you can see on the right here, we have the number of tags equals 1, and we have 1 tag, highway equals residential. If I want to do a preset instead, I can go up to the top and press preset. And I can either search for a preset or go into all of these different keys. For example, this highway, I can go to highway, and this is a street. And we have all these different types of streets. So we can tag it as a residential highway, a secondary highway. If there's a junction that you want to tag something as, or a traffic hazard, any of these different types of presets are available to you. This also goes for different types of water, different types of shops, if you know what things are for. So this is really useful if you know the specific type of item that you want to draw. Next, we're going to go into land use. And I'm going to turn off my imagery for this one and scroll a little bit out of bounds. All right. Let's say I have an area here that I want to do land use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press that add nodes button, or I can click the shorthand, which is A, and I'm going to click, once again, click every so often, tracing a land use feature, creating that polygon. And then once I've determined that this is my land use, I'm going to go back to that first node that I drew, and I'm going to left click. And as you can see, it's created that polygon for me. I'm going to go back up to my select tool at the top left here and make sure that I have this selected. Make sure I tag it appropriately. So let's go up to presets. I can go to geography, land use, and you have all these different types of land use. I'm going to pretend like this is farmland. So I'm going to tag it as land use equals farmland. We don't know the crop or anything, because this is, again, just for a demo. And I'm going to press apply preset. And you can see there's a little highlight to where that land use is. It's going to be in the middle. And it's tagged it on the right as land use equals farmland. All right, do we have any questions?
Questions so far? Good job.
Perfect. All right, and we're going to go back to our slideshow, and I'm going to hand it back off to Flora.
Right. So we'll now talk about how to use the installed plugins. So these are the shortcuts and the plugins that we explained to you earlier. Next slide. So when we're mapping buildings, how do we do that? We select B on our keyboard, and this will activate the building tool. Then we just left click on the corner of a building, and you keep your mouse button pressed. Move your pointer along the longest edge of the building, so you can see how that's done on the animation. And then release it at the corner that you want to stop it at. You can adjust the depth of the building, but then you're done and you have your first building mapped. The presets assume certain qualities. So what's nice is that you can do a lot of these at once without having to individually square and tag the way that we used to have to do in the ID editor. So it's very useful, and it's a great application of presets, and it just makes your mapping of buildings so much faster. Next slide. So the next step is obviously that many buildings aren't in perfect rectangular shapes, but they might be in a U shape or a T or an L shape. The way you can see on the animation, that's an L-shaped building, right? The way that we want to do that is once we've mapped the building as a whole, so as a whole rectangle, even areas that aren't in the building, you'll then want to select X on your keyboard, and then you can just double click on the line where you want to add a point. And this will then create a new edge of your rectangle where the building extends. So you see exactly how it's being done in the animation. It can also go inward towards the building. You can really pull in any direction, and it will preserve the 90-degree angle. Like I said, Nazar will demo this later, but the animation actually shows it perfectly, and this is a great tool to use. Next slide. And aside from that, there's also obviously many buildings that aren't rectangular at all, and they're just circular buildings. So to map circular buildings, you'll want to make sure that you're in the building mode. So just make sure to hit B on your keyboard. And then you can switch your building tool to circle mode by selecting Alt-Z on your keyboard. Then you just trace the diameter of the circular building. So that's the middle line of the circle. And it will automatically create a perfect tagged circular building. You see it being done in the animation as well. You see them mapping the middle line or the diameter of the circular building, and then it just creates that. And then you can switch back to rectangular building mode by selecting Alt-R on your keyboard. It's also, what's nice is if you see that someone tried to make a circle, you can just press O to make it a circle using the existing points that someone already tried to map. Next slide. Now, sometimes you'll have a building that has a hole inside of it. It can be a courtyard, or it can just be an opening of any sorts. What you'll want to do is you'll want to draw one side with the rectangular buildings tool. And then the way you can see it being done on the animation is you'll kind of just draw each side of this building individually. And once you have these 4 buildings, so once you've traced all these sides of the building, you can select all of them, make sure you're in the S mode on your keyboard, and then you can hit Shift J, which will merge the overlapping buildings into one. So if you watch that animation carefully, and like I said, Naza will demo this later, but you can combine these buildings into one. Now, what's important is that you don't want there to be any parts of the building that go out of the main area. So it's just important to have the first building or the first traced building selected when you map your others. You can see how they do that in the animation. Next slide, sorry. And how do you fix buildings? This is the last part before Naza will continue with the demonstration. If you see unsquared buildings, which is quite common in JOSM, you can fix this by selecting it. So you select it using the S key on your keyboard, and then you hit Q the same way that you used to on the ID editor. You can also rotate buildings by hitting Shift Control, and then you can just turn it, or you can resize a building by holding Control Alt, and then you can just resize it. You can see it being done in the animation. Sometimes buildings are connected with 1 or 2 nodes, even though they shouldn't be. And the way you unconnect them is you click on the nodes that are connected. Usually these nodes are a bit larger, so that's how you can identify them. You click on that node, and then you hit the G on your keyboard, and this will disconnect the nodes, and then it will allow you to move the buildings apart if they're not meant to be connected. And I know it's a lot of shortcuts and keys at the moment, but at the very end of the slideshow, we'll give you a cheat sheet of all the shortcuts that you have on your keyboard. So just bear with us, and we'll get to that part. But Naza will do a demonstration now of what I just explained.
Perfect. And I'm gonna, as Flora said, I'm going to demo all of this in JOSM. So here, once again, I have my JOSM panel open. I'm gonna go up to an area that's pretty clear, and we're gonna use that buildings plugin to create some buildings. I'm gonna go up to this left-hand side to where this buildings is, or I can hit B on my keyboard. And there's 2 different ways you can make a building. You can use it using 3 clicks or 2 clicks. Do 3 clicks, you click once again, and then you can see I have this little rectangle that I can make to make the building as large or as small as I want. The other way to do it is I can click with my left click and hold and make it the length of the building that I want. And then I have this rectangle that I can make as big as I want. That's the 2 clicks. This is 3 clicks. Next, we're going to use the extrude tool, which you can use under, it's going to be under mode. And you can see down here, extrude, or you can press X. You want to make sure if I press mode and extrude, now you can see on my mouse, I have this little triangle at the bottom. This means that we're in the extrude tool. So this means when I double click, I will create a node on this line, and I can click this line and move it up or down to create an extrusion, wherever here, if I want to make it an intrusion. You can do this as many times as you want, as long as you double click and then take it out. Or double click and pull this in. And you can do this for any oddly shaped buildings that you see. Again, that's going to be double click, and we're going to extrude that out. I want to make sure that I press my select tool and deselect this, which is just, I will click away from it. That can create a different building. The next building that we're going to create is going to be a circular building. You're going to do this by clicking Alt and Z, or if you're on Mac like me, Control and Z. Or you can also go to the right here and to where draw buildings is, you can go give me 1 second as I find the preset for it. There we go. And you can see on the bottom of my cursor here, it's changed into a cross, and there's a little bit of a circular building that I have there. And what this means is when creating circular buildings, I can click once and click twice to map the diameter of the circular building, and it creates that circle for me. Again, I'll click once again, and it'll create a circle for me. As Flora said, if you find a building and it's not quite circular, let's say we have this little intrusion here, I can click it and I can press O, and it'll automatically resize it into a perfect circle for me. And then I'm going to just go back to my regular buildings tool, and we're going to create a building with a courtyard. So what I want to do is I'm going to create one building. Let's say this is the bottom of the building. And then I want to make sure that I have this building selected, and then go to my draw buildings tool. And what the selection does is that when I create another building, it will make it perfectly parallel and perpendicular if I want it to other buildings. As you can see, I want to overlap the building because I am creating that courtyard. It does give me an error for it. But once again, it'll make that perfectly parallel building that I want it to. All right. And we'll go down here. The next thing you're going to do is go back up to the left to your select tool, and you're going to select one building, hit Shift, and select all of the different buildings that you just created. And while still holding Shift, press your J key, and that will make that entire building into one. Because we made sure to select that initial building while creating all of the buildings, I'm very certain that all of these corners are parallel, are perfect 90-degree angles. But just to be safe, I can use my Q key to square any buildings. As you can see, it did nothing, but if you need to square buildings, that's what you use. But again, we have this courtyard here that isn't in this lighter color that the building is in, a little bit darker on the inside, same as the outside of this building. Again, to use that Q key, let's say we have a little bit of a weird building here, but then this, of course, is not a 90-degree angle, but we do want to make it a 90-degree angle. I'll select that building and I'll hit my Q key, and you can see it automatically adjusts it. So this is a 90-degree angle once again. If I want to resize this building down here, I can hit Control and Shift, and you can see when I have them clicked together, my pointer turns into this arrow here, and I can shift my building as much as I would like and move it as much as I would like. All right, are there any questions for me about this?
Nothing posted in the chat. Very well.
Okay. Perfect. All right, then we'll go back to our presentation.
Great.
Wow.
And we're now, thank you, Naza, for the demo. We're almost done with the training. We'll now just look at how to work with JOSM and tasks. And then we'll just look at how to upload your data back onto the server. And then that will be the end of the training. So the way to launch JOSM from within a task, it's quite easy. You ensure that JOSM is running in the background. So you have to have the application already open. And then you'll just want to find a project that you're interested in the Hot Tasking Manager or in the Teach Tasking Manager. And then once you're in that project, so you see that on the screenshot, that's what it will look like. You have to click on the bottom left corner and change your editor from the default ID editor to JOSM. And then you just select map a task or map selected task, and it will launch directly in JOSM. If you want to change your default editor from the ID editor to JOSM, that can also be done in your personal settings, which are accessible if you click on your username in the tasking managers. Next slide. So what's important, this is quite similar to how you would upload in the ID editor, but it's important to upload frequently when you want to save your work. Because like we've said before, when you're done with mapping, you have to push it back onto the online platform from your local server. So the way that you do that is you select the upload button. That can be done either by hitting the little icon of the hard disk with the green arrow that's going upwards. Remember earlier when we were downloading data, it was going down, now it's going up. So that's quite logical. Or you can just hit Control Shift and the up arrow on your keyboard, and this will display the upload pop-up. Now there's a couple of things to watch out for when you want to upload, but you should always add your change set comments. That usually includes hashtags. If you're unsure of which hashtags you use, you can usually look back on the project or the task instructions on the tasking manager, and they will let you know which hashtags to use. But it's just important to add comments about what you did, and this is where you add those comments. You can say, I squared buildings, or I mapped this area, I mapped some roads. It's important to be as specific as you can so people can relate it back to the data that you uploaded. Next slide. Right, so this is just a recap again. The window that appears when you're trying to upload, it will just give you a list of all the objects that you've deleted, changed, or added. So it's always good to just review to make sure there's no major changes that you accidentally did. That can happen sometimes. That's why it's also important to upload frequently, so you don't have that many changes to review when you're uploading, and you can keep better track of what you've been doing and working on. Like we said earlier, it will ask you for what you did. So you have to describe the work that you did, and then it will ask you for your source. You can say imagery, but it's good to specify what imagery you use. So Bing imagery or Esri. And then you can also add, if you have local knowledge and that helped you with tagging, for example, you can add that in the chain set comment as well. And for your very first upload, JOSM will ask you to enter your OpenStreetMap account details again, but that's only for the first upload. After that, it will just automatically upload it back onto the server. Next slide. And then usually, if everything has gone well and if your upload has been successful, you can then see your changes on the OSM website. So you open on your internet browser, you go to openstreetmap.org, you want to move the map to the area that you edited, and then you should be able to see your changes on the map. Sometimes it can take a few minutes for the changes to appear, but yeah, that would then be the first edits that you've made using the JOSM platform. So that would be quite cool. Next slide. As we said earlier, this is a cheat sheet of all the JOSM keyboard shortcuts. It's really, really helpful. If you want, you can take a screenshot of it now, or like we said, it will be available later in the recordings and in the slideshow. It's also on the YouthMappers website, on some of the resources, but there's so many shortcuts. Some of my favorite ones, like we were saying with NASA, is if you want to align nodes in a circle using the O tool, Q to square buildings, G is to unglue ways. So there's just so many, and we can't go through them all. But when you're starting out with JOSM, I used this cheat sheet a lot, and it was incredibly helpful because I couldn't remember all the shortcuts at once. But with this cheat sheet is where we will end the presentation. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself, or you can write them in the chat. If there's any things that weren't clear or that you'd like another demonstration of, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Flora. Thank you, Naza. As Flora just mentioned, if any of you have any questions that you would like addressed right now, or something demoed once more, we're happy to do that right now. We still have some time to do that. So yeah, please, you can take yourself off mute and go ahead and ask your question. So Calvin just left. He messaged me privately and said that he had to leave, but which was perfectly fine. As a reminder, I know some of you joined the presentation late. This recording, the presentation and the slides will be made available to you. Will be made available to everybody that registered for this presentation. Okay, so once the recording is available, you should receive an email from YouthMappers with the link to the recording and the slides themselves. Oh, all right. Well, if there are no questions, then I just want to say thank you again to Flora and Naza. Great job. And thank you to everybody for showing up today and participating in this latest training. In about a month, we will have our next training, which will be advanced. All right, so with that, we will conclude this training, unless there are any last minute questions. All right, fantastic. A round of applause for Nora and Naza. There we are. And thanks again for everybody. We will see you next time.